I work at an outdoor mall in a great neighborhood. You'd assume that it's safe as hell to be here. But then again, you just can't be sure anymore. There are creepy people everywhere, and I just can't help shake the feeling that this isn't my last encounter with this man. I'm 19 years old, and I work at a kiosk that sells all kinds of wonky jewelry. It's usually teens, young adults, and occasionally some older adults that shop with us. Every once in a while, this man comes up to the kiosk, easily recognizable, same leather jacket, crinkled corners of his eyes, and one front tooth shorter than the other. He's usually harmless, but the last few times I've seen him have made me extremely uneasy. I greet every customer with, "Hey, can I help you find anything?" And most of them say they're just looking. He always smiles at me and says, "Just looking, darling." At first it was fine. I didn't care whatsoever. He seemed like a harmless 50 or so years old man. He always spent a very long time looking at the display and never bought anything. Most of the time I'm working the night shift at the kiosk while I'm surrounded by other shoppers and other kiosk workers. Mine is kind of all by itself in between two empty ones in the back. The mall sales have been going downhill the last few years, and I'm usually left alone, minus the friendly security woman that stops and chats with me on her rounds. She comes by every 30 minutes or so, and she's one of the few friends I have at work. The only stores in my view are a Reebok and a Macy's. A few nights ago, I was sitting at my kiosk, bored out of my mind, and the security lady had already continued on her rounds. I had scrolled through Reddit already, and was getting ready to open up Netflix when I hear footsteps coming up. I look up to see the creepy man staring at me, but not actually at the kiosk yet. I wave at him, and he gives me a little smile, but one that sends chills down my spine. A customer walks up, and I immediately jump at the chance to help them, trying to shake the creepy feeling I had. After I had checked out the customer and written down the receipt, I glanced up to see the man still staring at me. Before I could say anything, he started walking over, taking my eye contact as permission to come join me.
"Evening, darling,"
he said, doing an almost bow. "Good evening," I told him. He proceeded to do his usual checking the display, not buying anything. Instead of walking around the cart, he stayed by the register where I was, walked behind the chair to check the sides, but never went where he couldn't see me. Then he started asking questions, like we were longtime friends.
"So, darling, do you have a boyfriend?"
I've actually been single for over a year now. I told him no. I didn't have a boyfriend, but there was a checkout girl I found pretty damn cute at my local grocery store. "I see," he said.
"Do you have any plans after work?"
I was getting uneasy at this point, but I told him yes, I was going to a party.
"You gonna hook up with any boys?"
My jaw dropped. Whether or not I was hooking up with any boys was in no way any of his business, but I just told him no. He smiled a little and said, "Good. You're too pretty for them little boys anyway." He faced me again and came up to hug me. Until this point, I hadn't realized my heart rate increasing, and it only became apparent after I found it harder to breathe. Before he could actually do so, Linda, the security woman, walked up and glared at him. "Sir, if you're not going to be buying anything from this young woman, I suggest you go loiter somewhere else." He stiffened at the sound of Linda's voice. She's a very intimidating woman, and he left. "You alright, honey?" she asked me. I shrugged. "He's always here," I told her, and she shook her head. "Let me and Russ walk you to the car after work today." I nodded, relieved that she offered without me having to ask. The rest of my shift is fine. I get through it and manage to make my bosses a bit of money. At 10 o'clock on the dot, Linda and her boyfriend Russ are at my kiosk. They wait for me to pack up my purse and then walk me to my little Prius. They wait for me to drive away as well. On my way to the party, I stop by a gas station to fill up the tank. As I'm waiting for it to fill, I glance over and see the man from the mall at the mini-mart. He's buying a pack of cigarettes, and he looks out the window and sees me. When he does, he smiles and waves. He holds up one finger, asking me to wait a minute. I don't. I yank out the fuel hose and jump in my car, booking it out of there. I take several detours before arriving 30 minutes late to the party. I had to make sure I would lose him before showing up there. It's been a few nights since that happened, and the only reason I'm writing this now is because I'm actually working the morning shift, and I just saw him walk out of the Macy's across from me. Linda has someone biking around this half of the mall, so he won't come near me today, but keep me in your thoughts, guys. I work in retail, and I have a very unique name. This happened a few years ago, when I first started. I work at a 24-hour convenience store, and at this point, I was working the graveyard shift. I'm used to all types of unsavory folks, but there was this one guy who left me very unsettled. It was about 3 a.m., and unfortunately, I was working alone because my coworker decided to call out last minute. The store was dead, and I was packing out a delivery when he walked in. He was a short, stocky black guy, a little older than me, probably late 20s or early 30s. I looked up from the task at hand and greeted him with a friendly smile and asked if he needed help with anything. He grinned and looked me up and down, his brown eyes darkening with lust. "Yes, do you sell condoms?" I nodded and pointed him to the health and beauty section and proceeded to make my way to the register to cash him out. He browses for a little, and typically, he picked up a box of Magnums and those herbal sexual supplement pills. "So how are you tonight?" he inquired. I told him I was fine, working hard, and anxious to go home. His eyes traveled up and down my body, his eyes settling on my name tag, which is pinned just beneath my left breast. I felt a little uneasy. I've never been comfortable with people staring at me. He asked how to pronounce my name. I tell him. He says it's nice. Politely, I say thank you and begin to scan and bag his items, trying to avoid eye contact. He asks do I have a boyfriend. Truthfully, I say yes. He comments that he must be a lucky man and he wishes that he could be in his shoes. Again, I smile uneasy, and as we're supposed to do, ask if he needs anything else. "Not unless I can have you," he drawled lazily. Now I'm getting annoyed. I ignore his comment and proceed to tell him his total. He swipes his card, I complete the transaction, and tell him to have a good night. He thanks me and then asks if I'm working by myself. No, my coworker is downstairs doing some paperwork. I lied. Now he grins. No, he isn't. I've been watching you since 12. I haven't seen another person here in all this time. Are you afraid? I frowned. You've been watching me? That's not creepy at all. I tell him he needs to leave if he's done shopping. I have work to complete. Once again, he laughs at me. I thought he was going to argue, but a group of drunken guys walk in, and he leaves. Later that night, I check my Facebook and I see I have a friend request. Guess who it's from? Again, I have a unique name. Only 2 people on Facebook has it. I block and delete the friend request. Next morning, as I'm going to the subway station, the wanted poster on the token booth catches my eye. The face is familiar. It was the creep from my store. Wanted for sexual assault and battery on East 96th Street. The incident happened more than a month ago. I hurriedly told my manager, who called the police and gave him our tip. I don't know if he was ever caught, but please, let's not meet outside my store. This happened about a year ago. I work at a pet store where we adopt out cats from local shelters. They aren't our cats. We just help them get seen and adopted. We follow the interview and application processes set by the various shelters in order to determine whether or not to adopt to a person. The application process often includes contacting the landlord to ensure that it is fine that the person has cats on their property. One afternoon, a youngish man came into the store, maybe in his mid to late 20s, and walked back to our adoption center. He was thin, maybe a little dirty looking, but there was nothing too remarkable about his appearance. When he reached the cats, without even looking at them, he turned to my manager and said, "I'll take that one, and that one." He pointed at Fluffers and Delmonico, a cat and a kitten from 2 different shelters located in 2 different cages. Fluffers clearly had a sign on her cage saying she was approved for adoption, so my manager said, well, Fluffers is spoken for, but we can have you visit with Delmonico." She went into the little visitation room with the guy, and I walked away, glad I had dodged the bullet of helping out that particular guy. He had just rubbed me the wrong way. A few minutes later, my manager came to get me. She asked me to go talk to the guy to see what I thought, because, in her words, he just seemed a little off. We take the responsibility of making sure our cats go to good homes very seriously. So I sighed and agreed. When I went in the little visitation room, the guy was sitting on the bench with Delmonico clutched in his arms, just staring at the wall. The kitten was squirming a lot. He seemed okay, but he really didn't seem to want to be held by the guy. I introduced myself and asked if he was interested in maybe adopting Delmonico. The guy said yes, he would take him. There is a 2-page application to fill out before you can be approved, and if you rent, we'll need your landlord's number so we can make sure it's okay that you adopt a cat. He was just silent. Did you want to fill out the application? What application? He was still holding the kitten, who clearly wanted away from him, and he turned to look at me, and I saw his pupils were huge and black. His irises were barely visible. I noticed his leg was twitching, like he could barely sit still. I felt my palms get sweaty, and I explained the application process again, adding that it could take 24 to 72 hours to process everything. He focused on me and said, "I can't take him today?" I was badly wanting to get the kitten out of his arms. "Well, let's get you to fill out the application, and we'll see what we can do." He started shouting out of nowhere, "Okay, give me the fucking paper." I wordlessly handed him a clipboard with the application on it. He let go of Delmonico, who I immediately scooped up. I could feel the guy's heat on the kitten's fur, which severely disturbed me for some reason. I clutched the kitten to my chest and waited for him to be done, since other than the one outburst, he had been mostly polite, and my retail training wouldn't yet allow me to ask him to leave. He was just staring at the application, and I was trying to hurry him up. "We just need you to fill out and we can get the ball rolling." Then he said, I just can't wrap my head around the fact you need this information. This is crazy." "It's what the shelter requires," I said. Then he begins writing the word fuck in all the spaces on the application. I'm freaking out at this point. The kitten was still in my arms, his head was against my chest, and I'm trying to decide what to do. Then he suddenly looks at me. "This is bullshit. The system is bullshit." I had a pretty good rush of adrenaline going at this point, but my inherently polite retail persona still wouldn't let me ask him to leave. So instead, I told him that we typically find homes for about a dozen homeless cats each week using the applications. He stared at me. He rocked back and forth for a moment, and then met my eyes and said, very, very clearly, "You have a mind like a Babylonian orgasm. I am leaving." For a second, I felt like maybe I was the crazy one, like maybe that sentence made sense, and I was simply unable to understand it. As I ran it through my head, trying to figure out what he meant, he got up, slammed the door to the visitation room open, and stomped out of the store. Delmonico was unharmed, and as I put him back in his kennel, my manager approached me, her eyes wide. I showed him the application on which the word fuck appeared numerous times and told her, I don't think we should adopt to him. So, crazy tweaked out cat lover guy, let's never meet again. So let me start off by saying, I move around a lot in between SoCal and Arizona. At the time of this, December 2015, I was still living in Southern California at my grandma's apartments. I had gotten a seasonal job at Toys R Us to do something with my time and to learn some people skills. I'm a 24-year-old girl and have some pretty extreme social anxiety, and I find it really hard to talk to people, so I figured this job would help. Another important thing to mention, my grandmother is on a government program with reduced housing cost and has a 2-bedroom apartment ever since my grandfather passed. But due to the annual check at her complex, she is supposed to be the only inhabitant of her dwelling. So technically, I was not supposed to be living there with her, but she liked the help and company, and I liked being rent-free. Now, since I wasn't supposed to be there, I technically had to sneak around, and most definitely couldn't park on the parking grounds for the complex, as it would draw attention. There was a cemetery across the street from the complex, and then half a mile of houses leading down the street next to the cemetery, along which most of the visitors for the complexes nearby, including myself, parked. I was getting free rent and staying with my grandma, which was awesome to me, even if it meant I had to usually park half a mile away from the complex. I didn't mind the walk. So all was well for a few months from when I got the job in October, minus a scary incident with a stalker at work. I'll leave that story for another time, but eventually, they started putting me on night shifts, which I definitely did not mind, since I tend to be a night owl. Also, if you've ever been on closing shifts at any retail store, you'll know you can easily stay an hour or two overtime after the store closes, doing reshop during the holiday season. It was early December at this time. I ended up getting off work past 2 a.m. Around this hour at this time of year, in this part of SoCal, the mist gets unbearably thick, to the point of having to drive 30 miles per hour down the freeway with brights on and still being unable to see a foot or two in front of your car. Tonight was one of those nights. I wasn't too bothered by it at that time, but it does set off my anxiety a little bit. So by the time I got home, and it took me nearly 20 minutes to find a parking space, I was pretty anxious. Of course, with my luck, I parked at the very end of the half-mile stretch. Now, it's kind of a tradition of mine to get out of the car, close the door, and linger near my car for a minute while I audibly stretch a bit and sometimes complain, "Damn, today sucked." It's just a little habit thing I do, and tonight was no different. I immediately, after tucking my purse under my arm, turned on my phone flashlight and stuck it in front of my face to see where I was going, because the fog was so thick I couldn't see a foot in front of my face. I had walked in this weather many times before, so I knew my way home. The straight shot walk for half a mile, and a sharp turn left at the end of the cemetery, then crossing the street and into the gated complex. So I was on my merry way, until I heard it. A loud, almost obnoxious cough, and footsteps. My alert mode set in, and I instantly started walking faster and trying to be quieter about my movements. Call me paranoid, but I have had a fair number of let's not meet moments, and I certainly wasn't keen about meeting the stranger walking behind me, especially given the fact that I can't see a foot in front of my face, even with the streetlights and my phone flashlight. This continues for a few minutes, with an occasional cough behind me, and then I hear a whistle, the kind catcallers do, which bewilders me because 1, you can't see shit, and 2, since you can't see shit in this weather, I assume the person is purposely intimidating me, at which point I give up on walking and break into a run. The steps behind me break into a full-blown run, and I hear panting. Clearly the dude isn't in the best of shape. Neither am I, but the run didn't wind me down as bad. By now I'm speed walking next to the cemetery, and for some reason, my panicked mind tells me it would be better to duck into the cemetery and hide instead of walk to the straight shot home. Had there been no fog, I would have had a clear view of my grandma's apartment from the area in the cemetery where I stood. I quickly hid by crouching behind the entrance post to the cemetery gates, and I knew I fucked up, because his footsteps stopped too, and I could tell he knew where I was hiding because of my lack of audible footsteps. I crouched there for what seemed like 10 minutes, too scared to turn on my phone for fear of him being close enough to see the light and find me, and too scared to make a run for it for fear that he was intently listening out for me. I had figured out he was standing probably 5 or 10 feet from where I was at the entrance driveway to the cemetery right before the gates, which was confirmed when after minutes I heard his voice say,
"I know you're there, sweetheart."
I heard the distinct sound of a lighter being struck and then smelled cigarette smoke. I figured the dude was focused on his cigarette, and I made a run for it across the cemetery, somehow not tripping over any graves, all while intently trying to listen behind me. The cemetery's main entrance has wrought iron fencing, but the back and right end is wooden and serves as a separator between the cemetery and the backyard of various houses. And the other side, which is in front of my grandmother's apartment, is chain link. There is no other entrance or exit to the cemetery, but I know the chain link fence doesn't go all the way to the ground, so I laid on my stomach, pushed the fence out and up. I wiggled across and ran directly to the street to my grandma's house, pounding on her door until she opened. I don't know how this dude found me. He must have been standing around nearby as I parked and heard me complain to myself loudly when I got out of the car. But either way, that was one of the most terrifying experiences I have ever had. So, creepy stalker guy in South San Diego who likes to come out of the mist and terrify women at 3 a.m. Let's never meet again.